Late spring wrapped the English duchy in warmth, painting the hills with emerald grass and the valleys with fields of golden wheat that swayed beneath gentle breezes. Roses climbed ancient stone walls, birds filled the gardens with cheerful songs, and elegant castles overlooked peaceful villages where life seemed touched by endless sunshine. Visitors admired the beauty of the land, believing happiness flourished behind every grand gate. Yet inside one magnificent castle, two lonely hearts stood on the edge of a marriage neither truly wanted, bound together by duty instead of affection. Only 22 years old, had grown up believing kindness was the greatest inheritance any family could leave behind. Although her noble family had once enjoyed wealth and respect, years of failed harvests, dishonest business partners, and mounting debts reduced them to quiet desperation. When creditors demanded payment that could never be made, her aging father was threatened with imprisonment. Watching illness and worry consume the man who had raised her with endless love, reached a painful decision. If sacrificing her own future could save his life and restore his freedom, she would do it without complaint. The offer came from Duke William, the 25-year-old ruler of the duchy. Tall, disciplined, and respected throughout the kingdom, he possessed everything that wealth and power could provide except peace. Since childhood, he had trusted no one beyond necessity. His mother's abandonment had carved a wound that never healed, and years later, the woman he intended to marry abandoned him for a richer nobleman before their engagement could become a wedding. From that day onward, William convinced himself that love existed only to disappoint those foolish enough to believe in it. His late father's will required him to marry before claiming complete authority over the duchy's estates, leaving him little choice but to seek a bride. Their agreement satisfied practical needs but ignored every dream either might once have cherished. Gained her father's freedom, while William fulfilled the condition necessary to secure his inheritance. Neither spoke of romance, neither expected happiness. The wedding arrived beneath clear blue skies. Noble guests admired the extravagant decorations, fragrant flowers, and musicians performing graceful melodies across the castle courtyard. Smiles filled every painted portrait, yet genuine joy never reached the bride and groom. Walked toward William wearing a beautiful ivory gown, hoping simple patience might someday soften the distance in his eyes. William fulfilled every ceremonial vow with perfect composure, never allowing warmth or tenderness to enter his expression. Their hands touched only because tradition demanded it. As evening settled across the duchy, servants lit hundreds of candles throughout the castle, preparing luxurious chambers for the newly married couple. Entered their grand bedroom quietly, her heart trembling with uncertainty rather than excitement. She knew affection could not be forced, yet she hoped respect might become the first step toward understanding. William stood beside the window, looking across the moonlit gardens instead of toward his bride. Silence stretched between them until he finally spoke, his voice calm but colder than stone. "You'll sleep in the kitchen tonight. I can't love you. Until that day comes, you are nothing more than my obligation." Every servant standing outside the chamber heard his words. The hallway fell into stunned silence. Lowered her eyes, refusing to let anyone witness the tears threatening to escape. Without arguing or pleading, she gathered the skirts of her wedding dress and walked through the long corridors alone. Whispering servants stepped aside, their expressions shifting between pity and quiet amusement. She descended the grand staircase meant for a duchess and entered the small kitchen, where the warmth of the dying fireplace offered the only welcome she would receive. Laying her veil beside a wooden table, curled beneath a thin blanket as moonlight slipped through the narrow window, only after the castle had fallen completely silent did she allow herself to cry. Upstairs, an untouched bridal chamber waited in perfect elegance. Downstairs, its rightful mistress spent her first night listening to the fatting crackle of embers, wondering whether a heart closed by pain could ever learn to open again. Morning sunlight spilled across the castle courtyards, turning the blooming roses into waves of crimson and gold, yet days began far from such beauty. Before the first servant stirred, she quietly folded the blanket she had slept beneath in the kitchen and helped prepare breakfast without announcing her presence. The cooks protested at first, embarrassed that their duchess insisted on chopping vegetables, kneading bread, and carrying heavy baskets, but her gentle smile left little room for argument. She thanked everyone who worked beside her, remembered each servant's name, and never allowed bitterness to shape her words, even when whispers followed her through every hallway. Some maids mocked her behind covered mouths, claiming she was only a duchess in title while the kitchen remained her true chamber. Footmen laughed whenever they saw Flower dusting the sleeves of her simple dresses. One afternoon, a young maid deliberately spilled water across the stone floor where it had just finished cleaning. Instead of scolding the girl, quietly fetched another cloth and cleaned the mess again. Her unexpected kindness embarrassed several witnesses, though none dared admit it aloud. The castle slowly discovered that humiliation never provoked anger from her, only patience that seemed impossible to exhaust. Whenever her daily responsibilities were complete, slipped beyond the castle gates carrying a plain basket. Hidden beneath folded linens were coins earned from selling the few jeweled hairpins she had brought from her childhood home. She purchased bread, medicine, and blankets for struggling families in nearby villages, asking each recipient to keep her generosity secret. To the poor, she became a mysterious noblewoman whose compassion expected nothing in return. She found comfort not in luxury, but in easing burdens that reminded her of the hardships her own family had endured. The neglected castle gardens gradually became another reflection of her quiet determination. Flower beds abandoned for years bloomed beneath her careful hands. Roses climbed trellises once more, lavender scented the warm afternoon air, and colorful wildflowers attracted butterflies that drifted through the pathways. Even the oldest gardeners admitted they had never seen the estate look so alive. Without seeking praise, transformed forgotten corners into places where weary hearts could breathe more easily. William noticed the changes long before he acknowledged them. Riding through the estate one evening, he found children laughing near the restored gardens, while elderly villagers admired blossoms they had not seen in years. The beauty surrounding the castle no longer reflected wealth alone, it reflected care. He asked the head gardener who deserved the credit, expecting to hear a list of hired workers. Instead, he learned that his wife had spent countless mornings planting, watering, and tending every fragile stem herself. Still, William guarded his heart with stubborn discipline. Memories of betrayal lingered whenever he looked at. He convinced himself her kindness was simply another mask people wore before revealing selfish intentions. Yet she never asked him for jewels, influence, or affection. She merely wished him peaceful mornings whenever they crossed paths and disappeared before conversation could become uncomfortable. Several weeks later, William collapsed with a fierce summer fever after returning from inspecting distant estates under relentless heat. Physicians treated him throughout the day, but when exhaustion overcame them during the night, quietly entered his chamber carrying cool cloths and herbal tea. She remained beside his bed until dawn, replacing damp bandages and easing his restless sleep without expecting gratitude. When William finally opened his eyes, he found no servants waiting nearby, only fresh tea resting on the table and a folded note wishing him renewed strength. As his health improved, he began noticing other small gestures. Every evening, a steaming cup of tea appeared outside his study before long hours of paperwork. His favorite books were returned neatly to their shelves after storms leaked through open windows. Injured stable hands recovered with unexpected speed because the Duchess personally visited them with food and encouragement. None of these acts sought recognition, yet each quietly dismantled the walls William had built around himself. One warm evening, while returning from a ride, William paused beside the restored gardens, knelt among blooming roses, laughing as village children chased butterflies between bright flowers. Her smile carried no calculation, only genuine joy that brightened everyone nearby. Watching unnoticed from beneath an ancient oak, William felt something unfamiliar loosen inside his guarded heart. A quiet thought escaped before he could stop it. When did I start looking for her in every room? From that evening forward, William stopped resisting the quiet change unfolding within him. Instead of avoiding, he found reasons to remain near her, discovering that every conversation with her carried a calm he had forgotten existed. One bright morning, he invited her to ride beside him through the rolling meadows beyond the castle. Wildflowers stretched across the hills like colorful ribbons beneath the summer sun, and for the first time since their marriage, they laughed together without hesitation. Spoke of the beauty hidden in ordinary moments, while William listened more carefully than he had ever listened to anyone. The silence between them no longer felt cold. It felt comfortable. Their days gradually filled with simple joys neither had expected to share. They enjoyed afternoon picnics beneath ancient oak trees where soft breezes stirred the tall grass. William surprised her with books written by her favorite poets instead of expensive jewels, remembering details she had mentioned only once. During the annual summer festival, thousands of glowing lanterns illuminated the castle gardens, reflecting across peaceful ponds like scattered stars. William extended his hand toward before the gathered guests and asked her to dance. She hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his, and together they moved beneath the lantern light while musicians played gentle melodies that echoed through the warm evening air. Later that night, they wandered into a quiet rose garden where moonlight rested softly upon every blossom. William paused beneath a flowering gazebo and looked at the woman who had transformed both his estate and the emptiness within his heart. Without speaking, he brushed a loose strand of hair from her face and gently kissed her forehead. The gesture carried more sincerity than any grand declaration could have expressed. Tears gathered in his eyes, not from sadness, but because she finally believed the lonely nights in the kitchen had begun fading into the past. Only days afterward, while helping gardeners arrange climbing roses along a stone archway, twisted her ankle on an uneven path. Before anyone else could reach her, William lifted her carefully into his arms and carried her across the gardens despite her embarrassed protests. Servants who had once whispered cruel remarks now watched in astonishment as the Duke refused to let anyone else assist his wife. By evening, laughter once absent from the castle echoed through its halls, and hope settled comfortably where loneliness had once lived. Even the oldest servants quietly admitted they had never seen their master smile so often. As summer deepened, William received urgent news demanding his presence in neighboring territories to resolve a dangerous political dispute threatening the stability of the duchy. The responsibility could not be delayed, no matter how desperately he wished to remain. On the morning of his departure, he found waiting beside the blooming garden she had restored with such loving care. Taking both of her hands, he looked directly into her eyes, his voice carrying warmth she had long believed impossible. "Wait for me," he said softly. "When I return, I'll spend the rest of my life making up for every tear I've caused you." Smiled through glistening eyes and promised she would. After William departed, however, peace within the castle quickly unraveled. Several jealous nobles, threatened by his growing popularity among the villagers, began spreading malicious rumors. They claimed she had married William solely to escape poverty and seize the duchy's fortune. Forged letters appeared suggesting secret conversations with wealthy suitors. Whispered accusations drifted through every corridor until even loyal servants struggled to separate truth from lies. Although no evidence supported the stories, gossip traveled faster than honesty ever could. Endured every insult quietly, but each cruel rumor pierced her heart. She feared William's enemies would use her humble background against him, weakening the respect he had earned through years of honorable leadership. The more she considered the damage, the more she convinced herself that loving him meant protecting him, even if the cost was unbearable. One peaceful dawn, before the castle awakened, packed only a small travel bag. She removed her wedding ring and placed it beside a carefully folded letter upon the table in the grand bedroom William had finally welcomed her into. Between the pages of the poetry book he had once gifted her, she left a pressed rose from their moonlit evening beneath the gazebo. With one lingering glance toward the gardens blooming outside the window, she quietly walked away from the castle without saying goodbye. Several weeks later, William returned with successful news, eager to surprise the woman he now longed to call his true wife. Smiling, he hurried through the familiar corridors until he reached their chamber and pushed open the door. His smile vanished instantly. The room stood perfectly still, the wedding ring rested beside a farewell letter, and the silence felt heavier than any grief he had ever known. William's trembling hands unfolded the letter, but the words blurred through tears before he could finish reading them. Explained that she loved him too deeply to become the reason malicious rumors damaged his reputation or divided the duchy. She believed leaving was the only gift she still had the power to offer. The letter ended with a simple wish that he would someday find the happiness she had quietly prayed for every night. As the page slipped from his fingers, William looked around the empty chamber. The fresh roses she had arranged had begun to wilt without her care, and the silence seemed louder than every celebration the castle had ever hosted. For the first time since childhood, the powerful Duke fell to his knees and wept without restraint. The following morning, he summoned every servant into the great hall. Instead of demanding answers with anger, he admitted his own failures before them all. He confessed that his pride had humiliated the woman who deserved only respect and kindness. Ashamed by his honesty, several servants revealed the cruel gossip they had repeated and the lies spread by jealous nobles after his departure. William dismissed those responsible for creating the rumors and publicly declared that had always honored the duchy with grace beyond measure. Yet clearing her name meant nothing if she never returned to hear it. Ignoring unfinished reports and meetings with influential landowners, William mounted his horse and began searching for his wife. He visited every nearby village where she had once delivered food and medicine. He stopped at churches where priests remembered her generous donations made without revealing her name. He rode through bustling marketplaces where merchants smiled sadly upon hearing her name, recalling the gentle duchess who always asked whether struggling families needed help before purchasing anything for herself. Each place offered another story of compassion, and every story deepened William's understanding of the extraordinary woman he had nearly lost forever. The search stretched into weeks beneath bright summer skies. Dust covered William's boots, and exhaustion lined his face, but he refused to abandon hope. An elderly schoolmaster finally told him about a young woman teaching children in a quiet countryside cottage surrounded by wildflowers. William thanked the old man and rode without stopping until the modest home appeared beyond a winding lane bordered by blooming hedges. Through the open doorway, he saw patiently helping several children sound out words from worn books. Her smile remained as gentle as ever, though it carried a quiet sadness he recognized immediately. When the lesson ended and the children ran outside laughing, turned to find William standing before her. Surprise flickered across her face before calm acceptance settled in its place. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally, William stepped forward, but she gently raised a hand, stopping him. "You once told me to sleep in the kitchen until you could love me," she said softly. "I finally realized I deserve a bedroom in someone's heart." Her words struck deeper than any accusation. Without caring who might witness the moment, William slowly lowered himself onto one knee in the middle of the village road. Farmers, shopkeepers, and curious children paused to watch as the proud Duke bowed his head before the woman he loved. "I was cruel because I feared being hurt again," he admitted, his voice breaking. "You stopped sleeping in the kitchen long ago because you've lived inside my heart far longer than I deserve to admit. I cannot change the pain I caused, but I will spend every day proving that you are my greatest blessing, not my obligation. Please come home, not because the duchy needs its duchess, but because I need my wife." Tears shimmered in his eyes as she saw not the distant Duke she had married, but a man willing to surrender his pride for love. She stepped forward, lifted him gently to his feet, and wrapped her arms around him. The villagers applauded quietly, moved by a reconciliation built upon humility instead of grand promises. Their return to the castle became a celebration of new beginnings. Before the gathered household and villagers, William renewed their wedding vows in the blooming rose gardens where their love had first taken root. He publicly apologized for the humiliation he had caused and thanked for teaching him that strength without compassion was empty. When the ceremony ended, he carried her across the castle entrance once more. This time he walked past the kitchen without slowing, opened the doors to the grand bedroom and whispered, "Welcome home, my love." Years later, the duchy became known not for its wealth but for its kindness. Schools, hospitals, and shelters flourished under his guidance, while William ruled with wisdom softened by empathy. Their home echoed with children's laughter, music, and shared joy, and the room that had once stood empty became the place where every morning began with love and every night ended with gratitude.